No woman lasts 7 days at cold camp. Emory Quaid set it at the hiring rail at Willow Meadow on the 14th of October, 1891, with 31 men in front of him, a cold wind coming off the Catlow Rim, and a woman in a patched gray dress standing close enough to count the stitches in his coat. He was 31 years old. He owned the biggest horse outfit in Harney County, Oregon, and he had spent the whole morning failing to hire one single man to winter his saddle band. "I'd bet the outfit on it," he said. He said it lightly. That is the part worth holding on to, because everything that came afterward came out of how lightly he said it. He was tired. He was short-handed. He had offered double wages 3 separate times to a line of men who all found something interesting to look at down by their boots. And when a man is losing in public, he will very often reach for a joke to cover the sound of it. Orla Rennick had been standing at that rail for 40 minutes. Nobody had spoken to her once. That was not unusual, and it was not by itself what did it. Men had been not speaking to her at hiring rails for 2 years, ever since the Blitzengrade went out in the spring of 1889 and took her father's freight road with it, and the teams went at auction in June, and the wagons in July, and the harness in one lot in August to a man from Winnemucca who paid less for 9 sets than her father had paid for 2. She had learned to stand in a line and wait and be looked past. She could do it all day. What she could not do, what took the ground out from under her every single time, was be talked about while she was standing there. Not to. About, in the third person, at conversational volume, by men who had done the arithmetic of the room and concluded that she was not in it. Dorsey Hoyt had started it. Hoyt was the /Q cow boss, 44 years old, a hard, flat slab of a man with a gray mustache and hands like harness leather, and when Orla Rennick had stepped up to the rail and said plainly that she would take cold camp, Hoyt had not answered her. He had turned his head about 15 degrees toward his employer and said she wouldn't last a week out there. And Emory Quaid, who had been awake since 4 and was watching his winter fall apart in front of him, had laughed once, without joy, and said the sentence that the whole of Harney County would still be repeating 30 years later. No woman lasts 7 days at cold camp. I'd bet the outfit on it. Some of the men laughed, not all of them. Enough? Now here is what those 31 men saw. They saw a woman about 27, tall, sun-browned to the wrist and pale above it, with dark hair pinned in the plainest way a woman can pin hair, and a face that had been out in weather. They saw a canvas coat gone soft and colorless at the cuffs. They saw one gray wool work dress with a square patch at the left elbow, sewn on with thread that did not match, and a hem that had been turned up and let down again so many times the old lines still showed like the rings in a stump. They saw a pair of gloves mended across 3 fingers. They saw, in other words, exactly what her situation was, because she was wearing it. And behind her, ground-tied and not moving, they saw a stout brown bay mare, 14 hands and a half, deep through the girth, standing hip-shot, with her ears out sideways like a mule's, entirely uninterested in the proceedings. Her name was Wren. She was 11 years old. She had been the near leader on a 6-horse freight team for 5 of those years, and she was the last thing Orla Rennick owned that could not be carried. What those 31 men did not see was that Orla Rennick had ridden 19 miles that morning to be at that rail, that she had eaten the last of what she had at Sage Hen 2 days before, and that she had exactly one plan, and it did not involve being hired in the ordinary way. She let the laugh finish. She always let a laugh finish. Her father had taught her that, never step on the end of a laugh, because the man who is laughing has to hear the last of it die out in a quiet room, and that is worth more than anything you can say over the top of it. Then she said, to Emory Quaid, not to Hoyt, "You just said it twice. Do you mean it?" The rail went quiet, the way rails do. Emory Quaid turned around. He had, in fairness to him, not known she was that close. He had known there was a woman at the rail. He had not known she was 4 feet behind his right shoulder, with her hand on the top pole. He took his hat off, which was a reflex from his mother, and had nothing to do with the moment, and he said, "Ma'am." "I meant no. You said you'd bet the outfit," she said. "I don't want the outfit. I want the job. And I want the terms in writing." There is a thing that happens to a proud man in a crowd when a person he has just been careless about turns out to be entirely calm. It is not shame yet. Shame comes later. It is a small cold drop, straight down, from the throat to the stomach, and it feels a great deal like being weighed. "It's not a job for," Hoyt began. "I'm not talking to you," Orla Rennick said, still looking at Quaid. "I've been standing here 40 minutes, and you've talked about me twice, and to me never. I don't hold it against you. I'm just done with it." Somebody, well back in the crowd, said "oh" in a low voice. "Cold camp," she said, 19 miles south of here, under the rim. 1 room, 1 stove, 1 spring, and the whole winter saddle band on the flat below it. 160 head. Somebody has to chop water twice a day and feed off the stacks and keep them from drifting over the rim when it blows. You've offered double wages 3 times this morning and got no takers, and you've got 18 days before the 1st of November. That is not me guessing. That is me listening, while nobody talked to me. Emory Quaid stood there with his hat in his hand. "I'll take it at ordinary wages," she said. $40 a month, same as any man on your crew, not a dollar more. Because I'm not a novelty, and I won't be paid like one. Held back to the end and paid in one piece. And if I quit, or if you have to send anybody out to fetch me off that rim, you keep every cent of it, and I leave the county, and you never hear my name again. Mister. Hoyt gets his week and his laugh, and I don't argue with it. And if you don't quit? Quaid said. That was the question. He asked it, later, 1,000 times, in his own head, and he could never once remember deciding to. It just came out of him. Then, my name goes in the crew book, Orla Rennick said. Not on a scrap, in the book, in ink, in your hand, as horse boss of this outfit for next season, at full wages, with the right to hire my own help. I don't want a gift, and I don't want your sympathy, and I would not take either one. I want the entry. The wind came up off the rim and took a whole sheet of dust down the length of the corrals, and 31 men stood in it and did not move. That's not a bet, Quaid said slowly. That's a contract. Yes, said Orla Rennick. That's why I want it in writing. They wrote it that afternoon in the cookhouse at Willow Meadow, on 2 sheets of ruled paper off the wagon boss's tally pad, with the whole crew crowded into the doorway, pretending to want coffee. Emory Quaid reached for the pen first, and Orla Rennick put her hand flat on the paper. I'll write it, she said. You'll read it. Then we'll both sign the one I wrote and the one you copy, and we'll each carry one. Hoyt made a noise. Quaid did not. She wrote it in a clean round hand with the letters standing straight up, the hand of somebody who had written out 6,000 waybills before she was 20, and that hand was the first thing that afternoon that genuinely rearranged Emory Quaid's understanding of the situation. He had been prepared for courage. He had not been prepared for penmanship. The article of agreement, when it was done, ran 11 lines. The term was from the 4th of November, 1891, to the 1st of April, 1892, 150 days, and she wrote the number out in the body of it so nobody could argue the count later. She would keep Cold Camp alone. She would hold and feed the winter saddle band, 160 head, off the stacks on the flat, chop and keep open water twice daily, doctor what needed doctoring, and account for every animal by tally on the 1st of April. Wages, $40 a month, held back entire, and paid in one sum at the end of the term. If she left the camp for any cause other than an order in Quaid's own hand, or if the outfit was obliged to send a man to bring her off, she forfeited the whole of it and quit the county. And then, the 8th line, which she wrote slower than the rest, upon completion of the term, the name Orla Rennick to be entered by E. Quaid in the crew book of the /Q as horse boss for the season of 1892, at full wages, with authority to hire. The 9th line was Hoyt's. She insisted on it. If she came off inside 7 days, the forfeit was doubled and she went that same week. Why would you put that in? Wick Fessenden asked her. Wick was the cook, 60-odd, bald as a stone, and the only man there who had spoken to her like a person all day. He never asked for it. Because he said it out loud in front of 31 men, Orla said, and a thing a man says out loud in front of 31 men has to have a price on it, or it isn't worth anything. His or mine. Wick Fessenden looked at Dorsey Hoyt for a long moment, and then went and got the coffee he had been pretending to want. They signed at 4:15. Emory Quaid signed first, which he did not have to do. Hoyt witnessed it, and Wick witnessed it, and Hannah Dowd, who ran the house at Willow Meadow, and had come across the yard because word travels 200 yards very fast, witnessed it third, and wrote her name larger than either man's. Orla Rennick folded her copy in half, and then in half again, and wrapped it in a square of oilcloth cut off the end of a wagon sheet, and put it in the inside left pocket of her coat, where it stayed for 150 days. She rode out to Cold Camp on the 4th of November, with a pack horse behind her, in a rain that turned to snow at the rim. Cold Camp sat on a bench under the Catlow Rim, where the rock came down in a long gray wall and then broke into talus and juniper. There was one cabin, 14 feet by 18, built of juniper logs with a sod and shake roof and a stovepipe wired to the ridge. There was a pole corral and a shed with 3 sides. There was a spring 60 yards off that ran a little all winter under the ice, and a trough below it, and past that the flat opened south and west for 4 miles of gray sage and cured bunchgrass, with the haystacks standing on it like loaves, 9 stacks, wire-fenced, put up in July. And on that flat, in the last of the light, standing in loose bunches with their tails to the weather, were 160 head of /Q saddle horses. She sat on Wren for a long time and looked at them. Then she got down and started work, because the light was going, and there is no such thing as a first evening in a winter camp where you get to stand and admire anything. She had the stove drawing in 20 minutes. She had the pack off, and the 2 horses grained, and in the shed in 40. She swept out a summer's worth of pack rat leavings, found the tin of matches somebody had left in the rafters, and the tin of lard somebody had left on the shelf, and discovered that the north wall of that cabin, when the wind came around after midnight, breathed like an accordion. And before she slept she took her knife and cut a notch in the door jamb, at shoulder height, on the inside, where she would pass it 40 times a day. 1. That was the whole system. 1 notch a day. Not because she was afraid of losing count, but because 150 is a number a person cannot hold in their chest all at once, and a notch is a thing you can put your thumb in. The first 7 days were not the hard ones. She knew that going in. The first 7 days of anything are carried along on the strength of having started. And the thing that breaks people in a winter camp is not week 1, it is week 11, when the light is short and the work is identical, and the last human voice you heard was 9 days ago, and belonged to a man delivering flour. Still, those 7 days had a price on them. It snowed 5 inches on the 5th, and blew it all off the flat on the 6th. She learned the spring, where the ice made first, which corner of the trough she had to open at daylight, and which one again at 3, and how the band would come to the sound of the axe from 1.5 miles off, which meant she never had to gather them for water. She only had to wring iron on ice and wait. She learned the stacks, and pulled the first one on the 7th, and found out that the wire on the number 3 stack had been strung by a man who had been in a hurry in July. She learned the band. That is a thing that cannot be taught and takes about 4 days. 160 head are not 160 individuals to a person who does the job right. They are about 14 bunches with a boss in each one. And if you know you're 14, you know you're 160. She had 11 of them sorted by the 9th and all 14 by the 12th. And she wrote them in a little book, a bald gray mare with a walleye who took 20 head anywhere she went. A big raw-boned dun-gelding the crew called Preacher, who would not be caught by any man alive, and would walk up to a woman with a grain sack. A sorrel with a scarred hawk, who could not be first at water, and would fight to be second. On the morning of the 11th of November, day 8, Dorsey Hoyt rode out from Willow Meadow to collect. He did not admit that was what he was doing. He said he had come to look at the stacks. He came up the bench at a long trot, with the wind behind him at 9 in the morning, and what he saw was this: 160 heads standing quiet in a fed bunch on the flat, with hay on the snow, in 3 long clean lines. A trough with the ice broken out and stacked beside it in slabs like broken window glass. A corral gate rehung so it swung. Smoke standing straight up out of the pipe, and a woman up on the number 3 stack with a wire stretcher and a fencing tool, retying somebody else's July work. She came down the stack, took off one mended glove, and shook his hand. "Day 8, she said. "You'll want to tell him. If you've made it this far into Orla's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you." Hoyt told him. He told him badly, in about 9 words, standing in the door of the office at Willow Meadow with his hat still on, and then he went out and did not speak to anybody until supper. The crew had a pool going. Wick Fessenden held the money in a coffee tin. 22 men had put $1 on a day, and the days they had picked ran from 2 to 9, and on the 12th of November Wick took the tin down off the shelf, looked into it, and put it back up on the shelf without saying anything, and that tin sat there, unclaimed until April, which is its own kind of story. Emory Quaid rode out to Cold Camp for the first time on the 18th of November. With a pack horse of flour, coffee, beans, salt pork, lamp oil, and a sack of onions, and 4 pounds of hard candy that Hannah Dowd had put in without telling him. He had been up since 3, working out what he was going to say. What he said, when he came up onto the bench and found her on the flat forking hay off a sledge with her hair full of chaff, was, "Everything holding?" "Yes," she said, and kept forking. He sat his horse. She worked. It went on like that for a while. Then he got down and picked up the spare fork off the sledge and started throwing hay off the other side, and neither one of them said a word for 40 minutes, and by the end of it the whole load was off, and 160 head were strung out along it, and the only sound on that flat was 640 feet in dry snow and the particular soft tearing noise of horses eating. That was the first thing that ever went right between them, and it happened because he did not talk. He came out every 14 days after that. It was not necessary. Cold Camp had been provisioned every 3 weeks in the past, and the crew had grumbled about even that. He came every 14 days, and he came alone, and he brought things that had not been asked for: a length of stovepipe, a whetstone, a second lamp, a bundle of newspapers 6 weeks old that she read to the last advertisement, a tin of blacking for boots nobody was going to see. On the second ride, at the end of November, he brought Hoyt with him. That was the day it nearly went to pieces. They came up together, and Orla met them at the trough with the axe on her shoulder, and Hoyt started asking questions about the number 3 stack. Good questions. Fair questions, a cow boss's questions, and halfway through her answer he turned to Quaid and said, "She's pulling them too fast. She'll be out of hay by March, and then we'll be hauling from the home place through the drifts. Not to her, about her," with her standing in front of him holding the axe. Orla Rennick set the axe head down on the ice and leaned on the handle. "Mr. Hoyt," she said, I'm going to say this once, and then I'm never going to mention it again, and we'll get along fine for the rest of the winter. I'm right here. You can ask me. I have the count, I have the weights, and I can tell you to the day when I'll be into the number 7 stack, and it is not March. But you have to say it to my face, because I'm the one out here, and I will not stand in front of 2 men and be discussed like weather. Hoyt's jaw moved. When you'll be into 7, he said. Not quite a question. Nearly, the 6th of February, she said. That's on 22 pounds a head a day, with the band split into 3 feeding lines, so the shy ones eat, which is why it looks fast from a horse. If we get 3 weeks of hard cold, I'll go to 26 pounds, and it moves to the 29th of January. And if that happens, I'll send word by whoever comes. And I'll want the 2 stacks that are standing in the long draw hauled over before the drifts close, not after. There was a silence. I'd have said the same, Hoyt said finally, to her, and got back on his horse. And that was the beginning of the end of Dorsey Hoyt's problem with Orla Rennick, though it took until March to finish, and it never once involved him apologizing. Emory Quaid watched all of it, and did not step in, and afterward on the ride home, Hoyt said the only sentence about it he ever said out loud, "Albie couldn't have told you what stack he was in." And Emory Quaid did not answer that, and Hoyt did not expect him to, and the 2 of them rode 19 miles in the dark without another word. The newspapers were the thing that broke the ice, and neither of them planned it. He came in out of the sleet on the 14th of December with the 3rd bundle, and she had the 2nd one still spread over the whole table, and she did not look up, and she said, "Your hay's going to be worth money in March. My hay's in my stackyard." Not that hay. All of it. She turned the sheet around. Freight on baled hay out of Ontario is up 30% since October, and there's a piece here about the Nevada outfits buying north because the Quinn River made no crop. If it turns hard in February, the first outfit in this county with a surplus and an open road can name its own figure. You have the surplus. Nobody has the road. I know what it costs to open one, because my father opened them for 21 years. Emory Quaid stood in the doorway with sleet running off his hat and did not say anything for a while, because he had ridden 19 miles expecting to have a conversation about lamp oil. "You read the freight columns," he said. "I read the freight columns before I could ride." She went back to the paper. "There's a whole page in there about a wedding in Salem, and I read that twice, so don't go thinking better of me than I deserve." He sat down and took his hat off. "Tell me about the Blitzen grade," he said. And Orla Rennick looked up at him, because that was the first question anybody at the /Q had asked her about herself since the 14th of October. She answered it for 2 hours. The grade, the 6 horse hitches. The winter her father hauled 40 tons of ore over a road that was mud to the hub. The spring it all went out from under them in 9 days, and he missed the light entirely, and had to wait for the moon to ride home by. And when he got in at 1 in the morning, Hannah Dowd was awake in the kitchen, and did not say one single word to him, which was a great deal worse than if she had. December was long. It got down to 9 below on the 8th and stayed under 20 for a fortnight, and the spring made ice 6 inches thick overnight, and she chopped it at 6 in the morning and again at 3 in the afternoon, with the light already going, and the axe rang off that ice, and the sound went out across the flat, and 160 head lifted their heads and came, every time. And there is no lonely in the world quite like having 160 living things come when you call, and not one of them able to answer you. She talked to the mare. Everybody who has ever wintered a camp alone talks to something. Wren was 11, and short-coupled, and entirely unimpressed by scenery, and she had one quality that mattered more than anything else out there. She did not care about weather. Not bravery. Indifference, a mare who had pulled the near lead on a freight team through 6 Novembers on the Blitzen grade, had made her peace with wind a long time ago, and when the flat was blowing so hard that the other horses turned their tails and shut their eyes, Wren would stand into it with her ears out sideways and wait to be told what they were doing. Orla rode her every day. The band had to be looked over every day. 160 head, 14 bunches, count them all, look at every leg, and get back before dark. And the horsework is where Emory Quaid's understanding of Orla Rennick came apart entirely, in stages over about 6 weeks, and he never did manage to put it back together in a way that let him think of her as a woman he had hired. He watched her catch Preacher. Preacher was that big raw-boned dun the crew could not lay a hand on. 3 of them had run him in the spring gather, and he had gone through a wing fence and taken 4 head with him. Emory had written him off as a horse that would live out his life uncaught on the /Q and be a joke about it. On the 20th of December, Emory Quaid came up onto the bench and found Preacher standing in the pole corral, eating out of a grain sack held in a mended glove. "How?" he said. "6 days," she said. "I fed the whole bunch at the corral and left the gate open and never shut it. Yesterday I shut it while he was in." He didn't notice, because nothing had ever happened to him at that gate before. That's all he ever needed. Nobody ever gave him 6 days. She scratched the dun under the jaw, and the horse leaned into it like a barn door. Everybody who ran him, she said, was in a hurry. He isn't a bad horse. He's a horse that's only ever been chased. And Emory Quaid stood on the other side of the pole corral with his hat in his hands and understood, with a clarity that arrived all at once and was not particularly comfortable, that he was not going to get through this winter with his life arranged the way it had been arranged in October. Christmas she spent alone, and it was fine. Wick Fessenden sent out a boiled pudding in a cloth and a note that said, in enormous letters, "Merry Christmas" from the tin. She ate half the pudding, gave the cloth to the pack rats to argue over, and cut notch number 52 in the jam. The blow came on the 14th of January. She read it 30 hours early, and the way she read it is the reason 160 head of /Q horses were standing in juniper on the 15th of January instead of piled against the drift fence at the bottom of the Catlow Rim, and the reason the whole of Harney County knew her name by summer. 3 things told her. The first was the barometer, except there was no barometer at Cold Camp. What there was the stove. The stove at Cold Camp drew badly when the air got heavy, and on the morning of the 13th she could not get it to pull with the door cracked and the damper wide, and she had to prop the door with a stick of juniper and stand back from the smoke, and that had happened exactly twice before that winter, and both times it had snowed within 2 days. The second was the band. At about 11 on the 13th, the walled gray mare took her 20 head off the feed line before it was finished, not spooked, not driven, just left, and walked them 1.25 miles south into the lee of the low juniper on the old lake bench and stood there. Horses do not do that on a still bright morning for no reason. Orla stood on the sledge and watched her go and said, out loud, to nobody, "All right." The third was the rim itself. All winter the Catlow Rim had been gray. On the afternoon of the 13th, it went a flat, dark blue, the color of a bruise on the second day, and the light on the flat turned the peculiar yellow-brown that comes when the sun is coming through a great deal of high-thin cloud that was not there at breakfast. She did the arithmetic, and she did not like it. The flat at Cold Camp is a good place to winter horses in ordinary weather, and a very bad one in a northeast blow, because a northeast blow takes the whole 4 miles of it and pushes everything on it southwest. And 3 miles southwest of the stacks the ground tips and goes over the shoulder into the broken country under the rim, where there is a drift fence, and where snow going over a rim edge fills a hollow to 20 feet and looks exactly like ground. Horses drift. That is the entire problem in one word. In a hard blow, a loose horse will not stand and face it. He turns his tail to it and walks, slowly, patiently, for as long as it blows, and he will walk into a fence and stand against it and let the snow come up over him. Albie Hoyt had lost 41 head that way in February of 1890. She did not know that yet. She only knew the ground. So on the afternoon of the 13th of January, 1892, with the sky still clear enough that a reasonable man would have called her a fool, Orla Rennick saddled Wren, put a second horse on a lead, tied 2 days of food and a bedroll behind the cantle, and started moving 160 head of horses 4 miles east and north into the juniper. It took her the rest of that day and all of the night and most of the next day. Not because horses are hard to move. Because 160 horses in 14 bunches do not want to go the same direction at the same time, and because she would not run them, she could not run them, on frozen ground, with 90 miles of walking still to come for every one of them before spring, and so she took them the way freighters take a heavy load up a grade, which is one bunch at a time, at a walk, with the leader as the load. She started with the Walleyed Gray, because the Walleyed Gray was already halfway there and had 20 head with her. She put those 20 into the juniper draw and left them, and she rode back 4 miles. She took Preacher's bunch next, and Preacher walked up to her in the open flat and put his nose in the grain sack, and 17 head followed him east because he went east. And that was the moment she understood exactly what she had spent 6 days in December buying. By full dark she had 60 head in the draw. By midnight 94, the wind came up at about 2 in the morning out of the northeast, not hard yet, and it made the last bunches easier and the riding worse. She was on Wren for 30 hours with 2 breaks, one of them 20 minutes long. She got down at about 4 in the morning because she could not feel her hands, and she stood inside the mare's shoulder out of the wind with her fingers under the saddle blanket against Wren's ribs until they burned coming back, and then she got on and went and found the sorrel with the scarred hock, who was the last one and who had gone the wrong way entirely. At 5 in the afternoon on the 14th of January, she counted 160 head in the juniper draw, 3 separate times, and then she rode the 4 miles home to Cold Camp in the first of the real snow, and did not remember arriving. She woke at 9 the next morning, fully dressed on top of the bed, with her boots on, and the fire out, and the cabin at 12 degrees. And the wind screaming over the rim in a note she had never heard before, and the window on the north side packed white to the top. It blew 3 days. When it slacked on the 18th, she went out on Wren and rode the flat, and the flat was empty and swept and glazed, and the drift under the shoulder where the ground tipped over was 22 feet deep and 200 yards long, and as smooth and blue-white and innocent as a bedsheet. Then she rode east to the juniper draw, and there were 160 head of horses standing in it, tucked into the trees, gaunt around the flanks and shaggy with rime, and every single one of them looked up at her. She sat there on the mare in the cold, and she cried for about 1.5 minutes, which was the only time she did that all winter, and then she went and cut a trail out to the stacks so she could start hauling feed to them. Because they were 4 miles from the hay now, and that was her own doing, and she would be paying for it in labor for the next 11 days. The /Q crew came out on the 19th of January, 4 men and Emory Quaid, on the assumption that they were coming to help count losses. They came up the bench and found the cabin standing, and the pipe smoking, and a sledge trail beaten east through 2 feet of snow. And they followed it, and they came around the shoulder of the old lake bench, and there were 160 head of horses eating hay off the snow in the juniper, with a woman on a brown bay mare, sitting quiet at the top of the draw, counting them for the 9th time that week. Nobody said anything for a while. Then Wick Fessenden, who had come along to cook and had no business being there at all, said, "Well, hell," in a voice like a man in church. Emory Quaid rode up beside her. He looked at the horses and then at the drift 4 miles west that he had ridden past on the way in, without understanding what he was looking at, and then back at the horses. "How did you know?" he said. "The stove wouldn't draw," said Orla Rennick. She found it on the 26th of January, and it changed the shape of everything behind her. The north wall of that cabin had been breathing all winter, and after the blow it was worse. There was a seam up by the plate where the chinking had gone, and the wind came through it in a thin, flat blade that would put the lamp out if the door opened wrong. She had been putting up with it since November. On the 26th, with the horses fed and 4 hours of daylight left and nothing to haul, she finally got the hammer and went after it. There was a board nailed over that seam on the inside, a piece of shake about 3 feet long, and it had been put there by somebody in a hurry. She pulled the nails and took it down, and packed the seam with rag and mud, and put the board back. And behind the board, wedged flat between the log and the shake where it had been put deliberately and not dropped, was a tally book. It was a stock book, the ordinary kind, 4 inches by 6, with a limp black cover gone white at the corners. On the flyleaf, in pencil, in the round, careful letters of a person who had learned to write not very long before, it said, A. Hoyt, Cold Camp, Nov. 1889. She sat down on the edge of the bunk with her coat still on and read it from the front. It was a good book. That was the first thing that got her. Albie Hoyt had kept a better set of camp notes than most cow bosses keep. Weather at morning and evening, wind direction, the depth of ice on the trough, which stack he was in and how much he had pulled, and the band counted and written down every single day. 148 head that winter. He had known his bunches too. He had names for them that were not the crew's names. He called the Wagered gray mare the Judge. The middle of the book was the ordinary middle of a winter. Cold, colder snow hauled from 4, hauled from 4, hauled from 4. And then, in February of 1890, Feb 9, wind NE hard, cannot get out to look, stove will not draw. Feb 10, blowing cannot see the stacks from the door. Feb 11, blowing Feb 12. Went out, cannot find the band. Fence at the shoulder is under. Rode to the drift and could not get down to it. Believe some are in it, cannot get to them alone. Feb 13. Counted 107, am 41 short. Feb 14. Nobody has come. I am not leaving them. And that was the last page with writing on it. Orla Rennick sat in that cabin for a long time, with the book open on her knee and the light going, and then she got up and lit the lamp and took it over to the door and held it low against the jamb. She had been cutting her notches at shoulder height on the inside edge, because that was where her hand fell. She had 84 of them. Down at hip height, on the outside edge of the same jamb, where a taller person's hand would fall if he were coming in with his shoulder against the door, there was another set. Weathered gray, filled with 2 years of smoke and dust, so that they had looked like grain in the wood. She counted them twice with the lamp an inch off the timber. 96, the 4th of November to the 7th of February. He had cut 96, and then he had stopped cutting them, and gone on writing in the book for 7 more days. And the reason a person stops notching a jam in a bad February is not that he has given up counting. It is that he has stopped believing the count matters. Wick Fessenden brought the supply out on the 1st of February, and she had the book on the table when he came in, and Wick took his hat off, which she had never seen him do indoors, and sat down across from it. "I wondered where that got to," he said. "Tell me," said Orla Rennick. So he told her, and it took an hour, and here is the shape of it. Albie Hoyt was Dorsey Hoyt's brother, 22 years old, and the whole outfit had liked him in the particular way outfits like the youngest man on the crew. He had wanted Cold Camp. He had asked for it twice. Emory Quaid, 29 then, 3 months into running the /Q, with his father sitting in a chair at the home place, unable to speak a word since the summer, short-handed, short of money, and proving something to everybody every hour of every day, had given it to him, and had provisioned him for 3 weeks at a stretch, because that was how it had always been done, and had not gone out himself once between the 20th of January and the 20th of February, because he had 4,000 head of cattle and a bank in Portland and a father who could not speak. The blow of February 1890 lasted 9 days. They got out to Cold Camp on the 21st. The cabin was cold and the stove was cold and the door was shut. They found 107 head. They found the drift at the shoulder, and in March, when it began to go, they got 41 out of it. They found Albie Hoyt on the 3rd of March, a mile and a half west of the cabin, on foot between the stacks and the shoulder, with a hay fork in his hand and his coat buttoned wrong. He'd gone out to them, Wick said. That's all that was. He wasn't lost. He knew where he was. He just wasn't going to sit in that cabin while it happened, and he went out one time too many, and the wind come back around. Orla sat still. Dorsey didn't speak to Emory for 7 months, Wick said. Not one word, and he never quit, which is worse. And Emory shut the camp. 2 winters he wintered that band down on the Willow Meadow Flats, where there ain't feed enough for half of them, and he knew it. And he lost more horses in poor condition doing it than he'd have lost up here. And he did it anyway, and every man on this outfit knew why, and not one of us said it. And this year, Orla said, this year he couldn't. Not with 160 head and the hay all put up here in July. He come to the rail in October with his mind made up to hire a man for Cold Camp. Wick turned his hat around in his hands 1 full turn. He offered double. He offered double 3 times, Miss Rennick, and I want you to think about how that sounded to them men, because every one of them knew what he was offering double for. And there ain't a man in Harney County would take that camp for 4 times wages, and Emory knew it before he opened his mouth. She thought about the hiring rail. She thought about it very carefully, the way you reread a letter after you have found out something about the person who wrote it. 31 men. A cold wind. A man who had already lost 3 times, in public, in front of his own crew, and who was standing there realizing that he was going to have to shut that camp again and winter 160 head on ground that would not carry them, and watch them come out poor in April and know exactly why. And then a woman in a patched dress had said, I'll take it. He wasn't laughing at you, Wick Fessenden said. I've knowed him since he was 9. He was trying to get you to not go. No woman lasts 7 days at Cold Camp. He had not been sneering at her. He had been begging, in the only language a proud man knows in front of 31 people, and she had picked it up and written it into a contract and made him sign it. Emory Quaid came out on the 8th of February, and she had the tally book sitting square in the middle of the table, where he could not miss it. He came through the door with an armload of stovewood he had split at the pile on his way in, because he always split wood before he knocked, and he saw the book, and he set the wood down very carefully in the box, and stood there with the cold still coming off his coat. Sit down, Orla said. The coffee's made. He sat down. He was 22, she said. And he kept a better book than I do, and he called the gray mare the Judge. Emory Quaid put both hands flat on the table on either side of the tally book and looked at them, and then, in a cabin 19 miles from anybody, with the lamp between them and 160 heads standing out on the flat and the wind coming around the north wall the way it had come around it for 2 years, he told her the whole of it. And it took him a great deal longer than it had taken Wick, because he stopped a number of times. He told her that his father had gone down in July of 1889 and never spoke again, and lived 14 months in a chair by the window. He told her that he had been 28 and had inherited an outfit with a note on it and 4,000 head and 40 men who had all known him since he could walk, and that the only way he had been able to think of to make them take him seriously was to never ever admit that he did not know something. He told her that Albie Hoyt had asked for cold camp twice and that he had said yes the second time because it solved a problem in his week. He told her that he had provisioned the camp for 3 weeks at a stretch because that was the way his father had done it, and that in the whole month between the 20th of January and the 20th of February 1890, he had ridden past the turnoff to cold camp 3 separate times on his way to somewhere he thought was more urgent, and had looked up at the rim, and had gone on. "I want to be honest with you about the thing I actually did," he said, "because everybody in this county has decided the thing I did was send him. That's not it. Men get sent. That's the work. What I did was, I didn't go and look. For 31 days. And there is no way to make that anything other than what it is." Orla Rennick did not say it wasn't his fault, because she did not think it would help, and she was not entirely sure it was true. She said, "Is that why you shut the camp?" "Yes, and wintered 160 head on flats that carry 70? "Yes, and came to the rail in October with double wages in your mouth, knowing full well nobody was going to take it?" He looked up at her then. "I hoped somebody would," he said. "I'd have gone out here myself in November if I'd had one more man for the cattle. That's the truth, and it's also an excuse, and I know which parts are which. And when I stepped up," she said. Emory Quaid was quiet for a while. "When you stepped up," he said, "I looked at you, and I could see your whole situation on you. Everything you had was on that mare or on your back. And I thought, she is going to take this, because she has to, and she is not going to know what she is taking. And in February I am going to ride up onto this bench again and find it exactly the way I found it before. And I could not make myself say any of that in front of 31 men, because saying it out loud would have meant saying the rest of it out loud. So I said the stupidest, smallest, most cowardly thing available, which was that no woman would last 7 days. And I wrote it into a contract," Orla said. "You wrote it into a contract," he said, "and I signed it, because by then there wasn't one honest thing left I could have said that wouldn't have been worse." The lamp guttered. She got up and trimmed it and sat back down. "Then here is what I've come out to say," Emory Quaid said, and he took his hat off the corner of the chair and turned it over once. And she watched a man who was about to do something generous and did not yet understand that it was the worst thing he could possibly do. "Tear it up," he said. "The article. I'll pay you the whole 150 days as if you'd stood it. That's $200. And I'll add the 2 months you'd have worked before you found another place. And there's a good sound little band of 30 head of my own mares I've no business keeping, that I'd rather see in your hands than sold. You could take the old Rennick place back off the bank with that. I know what the note is on it. I asked in Burns in December." He looked up, and he had the face of a man laying down something he had been carrying up a hill. "You've proved it," he said. "You proved it in 8 days, and you proved it again in that blow, and there is nothing left out here for you to prove to anybody. Come down off this rim. I am asking you to let me do this." There was a silence in that cabin that Orla Rennick remembered for the rest of her life, and she said afterward that the hardest thing she ever did in Harney County was not the 30 hours on the mare in January. It was the next 40 seconds. Because she wanted it. That is the part she never left out when she told it later. She was 27 years old. She had $3. Her father was in a rented room in Burns with a bad chest. The old place had gone to the bank in 1889, and she had ridden past its gate 11 times in 2 years, and made herself look at it every time. He was offering her the whole of her life back in one sentence, and he was offering it with his hat in his hands, and he meant every word of it. "No," said Orla Rennick. Orla, no, and I'm going to tell you exactly why, and you're going to have to sit there and hear it, because if I don't say it now, I'll say it wrong for the next 40 years. She put one finger on the tally book. That paper in my coat is the only thing I have ever had in my life that says what I am worth in a way that another man has to honor. Not what I'm owed, not what somebody feels about me. What I am worth. Agreed in advance, in writing, in front of witnesses, and payable in April whether anybody's fond of me or not. She was not raising her voice at all. You want to buy it off me. And the price you're offering is better than the paper. It is. That's not the point. The point is that if I take it, then for the rest of my life the story of Orla Rennick is that a rich man felt bad and settled up. And I will have signed my own name to that. That is not what it would be. It is what it would be by Christmas, she said. You know this county. He did know that county. And there's the other thing, she said. And it's the harder one. So I'll say it plain. You are not asking me to come off this rim because you think I can't hold it. You're asking because you cannot stand to ride up here again in February. This isn't a rescue, Emory. It's a bandage, and it's on you. Emory Quaid sat in a cold cabin and was told the truth by a woman in a patched dress, and did not defend himself, which was the single most important thing he did that entire winter. The 1st of April, he said at last. The 1st of April, she said. And you'll enter my name in the book yourself, in your own hand, because that's the 8th line, and you'll do it in front of the crew. I will. Good. She got up and got the pot. Now drink your coffee, and then come and look at the sorrel with the scarred hawk, because he's off in front and I don't like it. On the morning of the 9th of February, 1892, the stove at Cold Camp would not draw. She stood in front of it with the door cracked and the damper wide and the smoke rolling out flat across the room. And she looked at the date on the flour sack tag where she had been keeping her supply count, and she felt the whole cabin turn around her. The 9th of February. Wind any hard. Stove will not draw. Word for word. 2 years to the day. She was moving horses inside 40 minutes. It was easier this time, and it was also worse. Easier, because the trail east to the Juniper Draw had been beaten open since January, and the band knew the road, and the Walled Gray took her 20 head down it, at a swinging walk without being asked. Worse, because she had to pull 3 sledge loads of hay across after them in the same day, and because the light was already dirty by 2 in the afternoon. And because the sky over the rim was not blue-black this time. It was the color of a nickel. By dark on the 9th, she had 160 head in the Juniper and 4 tons of hay behind them, and she was back at the cabin with her coat frozen stiff in the shape of her arms. Down at Willow Meadow that same afternoon, Emory Quaid stood in the yard and looked at the same sky and knew the same date. Dorsey Hoyt found him in the barn at 5 the next morning, saddling the big gray. You won't make it, Hoyt said. Probably not. Emory. It was the first time in 2 years Dorsey Hoyt had used his name. She moved them. You know she moved them. She's read it 2 days before you did, same as January. I know. Then what are you going out there for? And Emory Quaid, with the cinch in his hand, said the truest thing he had said in 2 years, because last time I didn't. He rode out at 6 into a wind that was still only a wind. It came around out of the northeast at about 11:30, and by 1 in the afternoon there was no world at all, no rim, no sage, no ground, nothing but a roaring white 20 feet across with himself in the middle of it. And he had missed the turn at the old lake bench by half a mile, because the turn was under 3 feet of new snow, and the juniper that marked it looked like every other juniper on that country. At 4 in the afternoon he was on foot, leading the gray, walking because a walking man stays warmer than a sitting one, going in the direction he believed the bench to be, which was wrong by about 40 degrees. At the same hour, a mile and a quarter east of him, Orla Rennick was trying to make Wren go to the water. And Wren would not go. The mare had never once refused her. Not on the Blitzen grade, not in the January blow, not in 11 years. Orla put her leg on, and the mare went 3 steps and swung her head hard west into the wind and stopped, and stood, ears out sideways, and would not be turned. Orla Rennick sat there for perhaps 5 seconds. Then she dropped the reins on the mare's neck and said, "All right." "Go on, then." Wren went west at a walk, with her nose into it, for about 12 minutes, and then stopped, and Orla could not see anything at all, and then out of the white about 30 feet in front of her, a horse's head came up. The gray was standing head down with his rump to the wind and the reins under his feet. Emory Quaid was on the ground beside him, not down, but sitting, with his back against the horse's front legs, which is what a man does about 20 minutes before he stops doing anything. She got him up. She got his hands inside her own coat against her ribs, which is where the cold went into her fingers and never entirely came out of 2 of them. She got him on the gray. It took her 4 tries, and she was not gentle about the last one, and she got a lead on the gray, and put Wren's nose east, and the mare took them home in 50 minutes over ground that Orla Rennick could not see 1 yard of. They were snowed into that cabin for 3 days. She got his boots off with a knife because the laces were ice. She had him in the bunk under everything in the camp, including the horse blankets by 6, and she sat up with the stove until 2 in the morning, feeding it juniper a stick at a time. And he shook so hard for the first 2 hours that the bunk moved on the floor. Sometime after midnight he started talking, and could not stop. That happens when a man comes back from cold, and he talked about his father, and about the summer he was 19, and about a dog he had, and about Albie Hoyt's hat which had come off, and which they had found in April 200 yards from the cabin. And Orla Rennick sat on a nail keg by the stove, with her left hand wrapped in a wet cloth, and let him say all of it, and never once told him to rest. The 11th they could not open the door past 8 inches. The 12th the spring froze to the bottom. That was the true crisis, and it had nothing to do with either of them. She got out to the juniper draw at midday on the 12th, with a shovel and an axe on the sledge, and the band was standing, and the water she had counted on. The little seep at the head of the draw that ran warm enough to keep 4 feet of open ground around it was a mound of gray ice, with nothing under it. 160 head. 3 days without water, and the hay dry as paper. And while she stood there with the axe in a hand she could not close properly, the walled gray mare, the judge, walked past her 60 yards down the draw to a place Orla had ridden over 200 times, and began to paw. She had 9 head standing around her by the time Orla got there. There was black mud under the snow, and under the mud there was water moving. They opened it with the shovel and the axe, and it took until dark, and they had to widen it twice for the crowding. And Emory Quaid worked the last 4 hours of it on his feet, 30 hours, after being brought in on the front of somebody else's saddle, because she told him flatly that he could either work or go back and sit in the cabin, and he was not going to sit in the cabin. They watered 160 head at that seep for 6 days. Dorsey Hoyt came up onto the bench on the 14th of February, with 4 men, 2 spare horses and a coil of rope, expecting to have to find a body. What he found was a beaten trail east, and a woman and a man on the same sledge coming back down it with a load of hay and an axe and a shovel, and 160 head of /Q horses standing on open water in a juniper draw in the worst week of weather that country had had in 30 years. Hoyt sat his horse at the top of the draw for a long while. Then he rode down and took the fork off the sledge without a word and started throwing hay, which was, from Dorsey Hoyt, a speech of about 20 minutes. Later, at the cabin, he looked at her left hand while she was pouring, and she saw him look. 2 of them? He said. The 2 middle ones. They'll do. They don't bend the whole way. Dorsey Hoyt nodded slowly. My brother's hat, he said, is in a box under my bunk, and I have not opened that box in 2 years, and I am going to tell you something, because you're the only person on this outfit that's earned hearing it. He looked at the door jamb, at the 2 sets of notches, hers at shoulder height and his brother's at the hip, and he had clearly seen them the moment he walked in. He'd have got them to that seep. Albie would have. If there'd been one other soul out here to hold the trail open while he went and looked for it, he'd have got them there, and he'd have come home. Nobody said anything. So I'm not going to have any talk in Burns about the 3 days, Hoyt said, standing up and putting his hat on. There'll be some. I'll deal with it. There was some. He dealt with it. March was the long part. It always is. The weather broke and came back twice. She went into the number 7 stack on the 6th of February, exactly as she had told Hoyt in November she would, and the number 9 stack on the 14th of March with 18 days still to run. And she took the band down to 19 pounds ahead and rode the flat every morning looking at flanks and made it stretch. And it stretched. And on the last week, they were eating the sweepings and the bottom of the stackyard and looking for more, and every one of them was standing. He came out every 7 days in March instead of every 14, and he never once pretended it was about supply. He came at first light, and he worked, and at 4 in the afternoon he got on his horse and rode 19 miles home. And they said perhaps 200 words to each other in a day, and about 40 of them were ever about anything but horses. Once, on the 21st, he stood at the head of the sledge with the lines in his hands and said, without turning around, when this is discharged, I'm going to have some things to say to you that I can't say while I'm holding your paper. And Orla Rennick said, then hold it properly for 11 more days. And he laughed for the first time since October and nearly put the sledge in the stackyard fence. Hannah Dowd sent out thread. Not once. 4 times in 4 separate parcels, with no note in any of them, which is the loudest a woman of that generation could possibly be. She cut notch 130, and notch 140, and notch 149. And on the morning of the 1st of April 1892, day 150, Orla Rennick got up at 4 in a cabin she had lived in alone since the 4th of November, and lit the lamp, and put on the grey-work dress with the square patch at the left elbow, and sewed the hem where it had gone again in March, and went out and fed 160 head of horses for the last time under that contract. They came up the bench at 9 in the morning. The whole outfit, 22 men, Wick Fessenden on the wagon, Hannah Dowd on the seat beside him, with her hands folded and her mouth set, Dorsey Hoyt out in front, and Emory Quaid riding at the back where an owner does not ride. They had all come to count. The count took an hour and 20 minutes, because Hoyt did it properly by bunch with 2 men on the wings and Wick calling tally, and Orla Rennick sat on Wren at the top of the flat and did not help and did not speak. At 25 past 10, Dorsey Hoyt rode over to the wagon and said, loud, so the whole flat got it, 160. Then he said, louder, 160 head, and there ain't a poor one in the bunch. I've counted this outfit's horses off winter feed 19 times. This is the best April I ever counted. Emory Quaid got down off his horse in the middle of the flat and took a ledger out of his saddlebag. It was the crew book of the /Q, a heavy thing bound in canvas, and he opened it on the tailgate of the wagon, with 22 men standing around it, and he took the pencil out of his coat. The 8th line, he said. The 8th line, said Orla Rennick. And Emory Quaid wrote in his own hand in the book, at the head of the page for the season of 1892, Orla Rennick, horse boss, full wages, authority to hire. Then he counted out $200 in gold and paper on the tailgate beside the book, 5 months at $40, and she picked it up and put it in her coat in the same inside left pocket where the article had lived for 150 days, and she took the article out and unfolded it and read the whole thing through one time, all 11 lines, in front of everybody, because she had said in October that she would. Discharged, she said. "Discharged," he said. Wick Fessenden came around the wagon with the coffee tin and handed it to her. $22, he said. Nobody won. The days they picked run from 2 to 9, and the earliest wrong man was Perce there, and the latest wrong man was me. "Put it back on the shelf," said Orla Rennick. "Run it again in November on whether I'll do a second one." The laugh that went up off that flat was heard. Wick swore for the rest of his life, at the long draw fence 2 miles away. Now, here is the part that matters, and it is the reason this is not a story about a man who felt sorry for a woman in a patched dress. Emory Quaid did not pay off her father's note. He never did. It sat at the bank in Burns for another 3 years, and Orla Rennick took it off them herself on the 9th of September 1895, out of horse money, and she has the receipt, and it is in a frame. What Emory Quaid did was on the 20th of June, 1892, and it was on paper, and she wrote it, because by then he had learned that this was simply how business was conducted with her. The horse side of the /Q, the band, the increase, the breaking, the sail strings and the winter camp, under her name and her authority. A third of the increase to her outright. Cold Camp rebuilt to her plan, which meant a second stove, a proper stackyard fence, a shed with 4 sides, and a written standing rule that no soul on that outfit ever winters that bench alone again. 2 hands or nobody, in every year, in any weather, without exception. She wrote that last clause first, before any of the ones about money, and Emory Quaid read it and put his hand over his eyes for a moment and then signed it. They were married in Burns on the 4th of November, 1892, which was 1 year to the day from the morning she rode out to Cold Camp, and which was not an accident. He asked her in a way that his own crew repeated for 40 years, because he handed her a folded sheet of ruled paper across a table at the Willow Meadow Cookhouse, and she opened it, and it was written out as an article of agreement in his own hand, with the term, the parties, the considerations, and a line at the bottom for 2 signatures and 3 witnesses. The term was, "For so long as either of us is standing." She read it twice, the way she read everything. "There's an error in line 4, she said. "Where? You've written the said Orla Rennick to be provided for." She took his pencil out of his coat pocket, which she had never done before, and struck it through and wrote above it, and turned it around so he could see. "Provided with. Not for. I'll take the second one all day, and I will never take the first one." She signed it. Hannah Dowd witnessed it and wrote her name larger than either of theirs. Dorsey Hoyt witnessed it second, and under his name, unasked, he wrote, "A. Hoyt, Cold Camp, 1889-1890. Nobody ever asked him to take that out." She kept the gray dress. That is the detail people always want, and it is true. It hung on a nail inside the door of the rebuilt cabin at Cold Camp for 30 years, with the patch at the elbow and the hem let down twice. And every hand who ever wintered that bench knew what it was. And it was still hanging there in 1923 when the /Q sold the South End. Her left hand never came all the way back. The 2 middle fingers stayed stiff, and she rode and roped and wrote out 30 years of contracts with them anyway, and when strangers asked, she said she got it in a cold February, and did not say whose hands she had been holding. And the door jamb. They never planed it. It went into the new cabin hole, cut out and reset, because she would not have it otherwise. 96 notches at hip height on the outside edge, weathered gray, made by a 22-year-old man who did not come home, and 150 notches at shoulder height on the inside edge, made by a woman in a patched dress who did. She used to run her thumb along the low ones on her way out the door in the morning. Every morning, for 30 years, because a man at a hiring rail once said that no woman lasts 7 days at Cold Camp, and he was not wrong about the camp. He was only wrong about who was going to be counting.